So when I was writing this lesson, I got nervous. Not because I get nervous speaking in front of a crowd, sorry. I was nervous because I wanted to put together something really good to share with you, something that was meaningful and impactful for your lives, every day. I could sit up here and tell you the story of Joseph. That's what we're diving into, Genesis 37, story of Joseph. I could sit up here and just tell you that story, expositorily, and maybe you would learn something and maybe you wouldn't, but I want to share with you something that I'm learning more about that maybe you guys can relate to, and I think it's really well illustrated and a critical part of the story of Joseph. So just to start it off, I just want to talk to you kind of on a deeper level about that issue, and that's that when we're faced with challenges in life, there's a lot of different challenges, right? We have relationship challenges, financial challenges, health challenges. There's stuff coming up every day that challenges us that we have to work on or choose not to work on. In the face of these challenges, whether we see it or not, we do make a crucial decision, and that's whether to follow God and to trust Him, or maybe we choose not to see God's hand at work in these challenges and just choose to passively not trust God. I don't think it comes down, it's not typically a decision where it's like, oh, God's obviously orchestrating this in my life. I think, should I choose to trust Him or not trust Him? I think I'm going to choose not to trust God. I don't think that decision ever really happens. I think we either see God at work in these challenges, or even if it hurts, even if it's not fun for us, and and we can choose to get negative and critical about stuff that's happening to us and turn into the victim, or we can choose to or decide to trust God. I often fall into the camp where I don't see God's hand at work in challenges in my life. I frequently, probably mostly, don't. It's rarely a choice of choosing to see it or not. It's just passively not seeing it, and in that passivity, you're also, a lack of decision is a decision in itself. So, with that, the story of Joseph is one of the most important stories in the Bible. It's widely considered to be one of the most important in the Bible, and it's, in my mind, it's mostly because of Joseph's incredible decision to trust God again and again, despite being relentlessly beaten down by the people and circumstances in his life. Who here watches sports, football, basketball? Raise your hand. Why do we like to watch sports live? Why don't we just TiVo it, or I don't even know if that's a thing anymore, Why don't we know the outcome? Why don't we like to know the outcome before we watch? Again, it's much less exciting, isn't it? Once we know who wins or loses. We can go back and maybe appreciate some good plays, but we don't really connect with the players and the battle that they're going through. The great joy of their victory as they're fighting through a challenge, or the deflation of defeat if they are not the victor. I think in the story of Joseph, it's really easy not to connect with Joseph because we already know how it ends. We know at the end of the story of Joseph, despite all the challenges he goes through, he winds up being the second in command of one of the most powerful nations on earth, right? And so it's really easy for us to look at that and be like, oh, well, yeah, he has to go through all this hard stuff to get there, but, I would go through that hard stuff to get there too. Well, the key thing is he didn't know he was getting there. He had no idea. He was facing these challenges, just like you and I face challenges in our daily lives, and we don't know where they're going to wind up. We don't have any idea if we're just going to run into more challenges and get beat down even more, or if we're going to wind up, super successful and blessed in all these ways. And so I think when we're going through this story of Joseph, I think it's really crucial to understand where his heart and his mind were in those moments when he's the most challenged and when he is deciding how he's going to act, and deciding whether to see God's hand at work and to choose to trust God or not. Because I think it's really evident in the way that he acts and responds to these challenges that he is seeing God's hand and he's choosing to trust God. So let's get started. Let's start off in Genesis chapter 37. We'll go right to the beginning of the story. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph was 17 years of age. 17, we got a couple 17-year-olds in here. He was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to his father. So right off the bat, we got Joseph hanging out with his brothers, and he runs back to his dad and tattles on them. Okay? And we go on verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons. Israel is Jacob. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. So we've got Joseph, who is pretty confident, but mostly because he's his father's favorite. He has not won the goodwill of his brothers. Okay? We go on in verse 5. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Then his brothers said to him, "Are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now he had still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, "Lo, I have had still another dream. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." He related it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is the dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" It's pretty obvious through these that although these dreams may have truly happened to Joseph, I have no doubt he was being honest about them, was it really wise for him to be sharing that with his brothers and his parents? Joseph seems pretty pretentious when he's doing that. So later his brothers are out taking care of the flock, and his father sends him to check on his brothers. We pick up in verse 18. When they saw him from a distance, and before he came close to them, they plotted against him to put him to death. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'A wild beast devoured him.' Then let us see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard this, Reuben's the eldest. Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but do not lay hands on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father." So we got Reuben, who saves Joseph through cunning, but lacks the conviction to stand up to his brothers. We move on in verse 23. So it came about, when Joseph reached his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the varicolored tunic that was on him. They took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty, without any water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal. And as they raised their eyes and looked, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing aromatic gum and balm and myrrh, on their way to bring them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then some Midianite traders passed by. So they pulled him up and lifted Joseph out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Thus they brought Joseph into Egypt. Now here's how Reuben reacts. This is interesting. Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. So he tore his garments. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy's not there. As for me, where am I to go?" So we've got Reuben, who came up with a plan to kind of save Joseph's life and restore him to his father, but the minute he goes missing, he gets really selfish about it. He's like, "Oh, what's going to happen to me? Who knows what's happened to Joseph?" That seems like a little bit more of the important question. So the boys, they slaughter a goat, and they put... So the story goes on. The brothers slaughter a goat. They take the varicolored tunic, they cover it in blood, and they return it to their father. And their father thinks that a wild beast has killed and eaten Joseph. So he goes into mourning. Okay? And so we pass on. We're going to skip chapter 38 because that's mostly about the brothers. I mostly want to follow Joseph's story. So we pick up in chapter 39. So Joseph's taken into Egypt by the Ishmaelites and sold to Potiphar, who is the captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard. Okay? And we pick up in Genesis 39, chapter 2. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now, when his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand, so Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. This is the first time that we see how Joseph reacts to negative things happening to him. One minute he's his father's favored son, and then his own brothers grab him, throw him in a pit, sell him into slavery to a different country. They take him to this other country, sell him as a slave to somebody else. And how does Joseph react? How does he decide that he's going to act or respond to that happening? Well, it says the Lord was still with Joseph. So Joseph made the decision to continue to trust God. And so he became a successful man. And everything prospered in his hand. So how did Joseph react? How would you react if you were sold into slavery? For me, I would despair. I'd say, why me? I would feel very much like a victim. Probably turn to negative, critical thoughts about how life is unfair, and probably wouldn't get much done. Might turn to vices. But somewhere in all this transition, Joseph decides to continue to trust God and to do his best for God regardless of his circumstances. And God blesses him for it. Reminds me of Matthew 16:25. I'm sure you guys all know this verse. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. Joseph decides to lose his life for God. Let's pick up in verse 7. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" I love this reaction from Joseph. There's a lot of things he could have said right there. He doesn't say he's sinning against her, or that he's sinning against Potiphar, or that he's sinning against his own body. But he says he's sinning against God. And that shows that Joseph really understands the difference between worldly sorrow, which can often be rationalized away in moments of temptation. He understands the difference between worldly sorrow and godly sorrow, which leads to true repentance. So again, Potiphar's wife just relentlessly chases after him. Pursues physical intimacy. With Joseph. And one day she catches him alone and tries to seduce him, and he flees, leaving a garment in her hands. Well, she screams, and the guards run in. She says that he tried to take advantage of her. And so Potiphar comes home, and the guards throw him in prison. And so once again, here I'll read it in Genesis 39, verse 19. Now when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him in the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in jail. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made prosper. Once again, we have Joseph, so he's thrown in a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, sold again into slavery, acts very righteously, and is raised up as a slave. And then he does the right thing and flees the temptation of sexual sin. And he's cast into prison again. And what's his reaction there? The Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. And the jailer commits to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail. It's just amazing. He maintains a positive attitude. He continues to trust God's hand in his life. We move on to Genesis chapter 40. So it's pretty soon after the cupbearer Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt / Pharaoh. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them, and they were in confinement for some time. When the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. So Joseph is able to interpret the dreams. Verse 6, when Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Then they said to him, "We've had a dream, and there's no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, In my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. So I take the grapes and squeeze them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was in fact kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. The land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So, once again, we have Joseph doing the right thing. He's trusting God. He's interpreting dreams according to wisdom that God has given him. And the cupbearer forgets about him. So we move on. Now Pharaoh has a dream. Chapter 41, verse 1. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. We had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was there with us, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh tells him the dreams. Now Joseph interprets those dreams for Pharaoh. Starting in verse 25. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. Years? No. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. And so what happens next? Pharaoh makes a decision about Joseph, starting in verse 38. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my